Hey, this is Derek and Jordan with the Namespace Podcast, episode 4. And today we are going to talk about the programming languages you should learn in 2020.
Yeah, so we're going to go through some programming languages that we think you should learn. An important thing to note is when you're deciding which programming language to learn, you should have a specific goal in mind or something that you want to accomplish with the language. Because we do have a bunch of different suggestions, not to say you need to go learn all of them, but pick one that fits for what you're trying to learn.
Exactly. Yeah. Each language has its strong suits. So, we're going to start on JavaScript, and that's really good. If you're doing any kind of web development, C is not going to be good for it. But, understand the culture a little bit. And a lot of these are all about giving you different perspectives for programming, where you have to solve problems in different ways based on the language or based on the platform or based on how it's deployed or how users interact. And I think it's that diversity that is really going to be the most beneficial. So without chewing the fat anymore, you want to get started with our first language?
Yeah, so Derek already mentioned it. The first one we were going to talk about is JavaScript, which... Did
y'all see that? I just softballed that intro in for her.
Yeah, that was great. Jeez, thank you.
So good.
But yeah, it is... not in any specific order, but we did talk about this one first because any sort of web development, you're going to be using JavaScript in some way, shape, or form. And specifically, if you're looking to get a new job or make money or anything like that, learning a front-end framework and being really good at it, like React or Angular is another one. That's something that's really high in demand right now in the industry, just front-end experts. So if you can really nail down all the details on one of those, that's a really great way to land yourself a job.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. And adding my own flavor to it. It's the language to go to when you need to provide some sort of user interface for a non-technical user, because there's no lower barrier to entry than just a web browser. Everybody has one. We have them on our phones as well. Yeah. And so it's just really easy access to give a non-technical person access to technical data. Oh, okay. Not technical data, but, data that is managed by technology, which all of it is nowadays. So, but moving on from there, another great one, and we kind of talked about it in our last episode. If you haven't seen it, Python, it's getting big. Both of us are Python developers or have been Python developers. Both really enjoy the language. You can hear all about why it's a great language to learn and some of the benefits and the history and all that good stuff if you listen to the previous episode.
We already talked so much about Python in that episode, so we don't want to repeat ourselves too much, but it's definitely a really great language to learn. So many companies are hiring for Python. You can do so much with the language, so there's a lot of different directions you can go with it.
Especially in those newer fields, machine learning, artificial intelligence, the data science stuff, some of the newer, well-compensated positions that don't have as many developers available for it, definitely are using Python. So highly recommend it. I think that'd be a good one for people to learn.
Yep. Okay, and then next one we were going to talk about is Go, which we also talked about that a little bit in the intro because that's a language that I'd be interested in learning. One thought behind that for me was, I won't have to work with super old legacy code. But we did look it up and Go did come out 10 years ago. So you might be working with some pre-existing projects.
But we had a bit of a conversation about this because... Right. 10 years old is not a great deal of time for legacy code to be building up. It's not like if you go and you look at some of these Java apps, code's been around for 20 years.
Right.
It's only going to be 10 years old, which, hey, that's not too bad.
Yeah.
I work on a team where we have a 6-year-old app, if I dare call it an app. But 6-year-old code base written in Python, and it's still really bad legacy code. Now, one of the ways Go combats this is anytime you're going to change the major version of your project, you're actually supposed to have a new repository. That's the cultural way and the recommended way to handle that. And ideally, that means kind of building things from scratch where they need to be built and getting rid of all that nasty legacy-ishness. Is that a word? Legacy-ishness?
Yeah, that's a word.
I'm pretty sure. I was a Scrabble master before I was a programmer, as you can tell.
Yeah.
But to Jordan's point, you wouldn't have to deal with legacy code because if they've gone to version 2, hopefully they haven't brought the legacy code over. I know developers. I'm just taking the guess that there's a lot of copy pasta involved in that.
Yeah, probably so. But kind of also like we were talking about at the very beginning of the episode, if as a developer, you're just trying to learn new ways to think about code or to design programs, Go is interesting in that you won't tie yourself down to a framework for the most part, since most of your code is supposed to be separated from a framework. That can give you a different perspective on building a project without a framework. So that can be beneficial if that's something you want to experiment with. And
hint for a future episode, rethinking the technical debt. This is kind of along those lines, but more on that later.
Yes.
After Go, and I think it's what I said was the language I wanted to learn in the first one was Rust. And I've heard a lot of great things about Rust. And as we did some research in previous episodes, we found out Rust, for the developers that are currently programming Rust, they really like Rust. And because of that, and I know surface level about it, it seems really interesting, but it is very much geared towards low level languages, and is not yet a drop-in replacement for C or C++, but is very close. And because it's a newer language, I think 2013 it came out is what we saw.
Yeah.
It has not, or what am I trying to say here? It has the benefit of seeing what was difficult in C and C++, and it's been able to compensate for those.
Yeah.
So you still get that low level development and efficiency that you really need, but a lot of the frustrations have been taken out of it. And low level code's not going away. We're still going to have IoT and integrated circuits and all that kind of stuff that we need code for. And I think Rust is going to be a big player in the future of that, which is why we recommend Rust.
Yeah, and just because of, like you said, how it's so loved by so many developers. So if you're looking for just a really great development experience, it seems like Rust is, people really enjoy it. So. Okay,
and we're going to get tangential here for a minute. I promise it's not a long rant. It's one of my shorter ones. But when it comes to writing code, if you enjoy writing code in that language, and there are people that enjoy writing code in that language, the quality of the code is so much better. And I personally think you can see that in PHP. Very few people have I met that are like, oh, PHP is the best. And in fact, I've met one and he straight up insane. Everybody else is like, oh yeah, I know PHP, but it's kind of garbage. And it remains garbage because nobody wants to write PHP. And so I'm sure there's a concept there. Like, if I talk to some cognitive psychologist or something, we could figure out what that is. But to your point with Rust, because they love it, it's going to stick around and it's going to continue to be good and be getting better. Okay, rant over.
That was a good one, though. I liked it. Good.
Thank you. That's why I do this, so I can rant.
Very great. Okay.
C#?
Yeah, that was on the list. We can talk about C#.
Yeah. Let's also say we're not doing this in order like, oh, JavaScript's the number one language. Right. These are just languages we think would be worth learning and why it would be worth learning.
Yeah.
And it's also not learn all of them. It's if the application applies or if the interest is there, then we're going to confirm, some of your interest. So C#. I was the one that kind of put this on the list, and it's something I told Jordan a long time ago. Was newer developers should learn these statically typed languages like Java and C#, very traditional OO languages, because it forces you to learn, or it forces you to use some of the things these newer languages are breaking for you. And you have to build up this discipline about writing with that language or writing code with that language because you have all these restrictions in place. And once you've built the discipline and you're writing good code and clean code from there, you can move over to something like Python or JavaScript, and you'll bring that discipline with you, but also now have the ability to break it where it makes sense to break it. And that's why I think C# is a good one to learn. We're going to get to talk about Java a little bit later on, is why that one was not on the list in place of C#.
Right. And another note about C#, because I agree, it's a really great language to learn for just nailing down object-oriented concepts. And also, there are a lot of companies hiring for .NET Core developers. So that's another skill set that if you have, usually you can find a well-paying job pretty quickly. It's high in demand for sure. So... Okay, and then we're also going to talk about Swift and Kotlin. Just kind of throw those together in the same category for if you want to learn native app development. It's a very specialized skill set to have to learn one of those languages and be really good at developing for either Android or iOS. So that's another route you can go if you're just trying to learn something new. If you want a new skill, native app development is definitely widely. A lot of companies want native apps these days, and because it's such a specialized skill, you can't just throw any developer into the mix. Like if you know Swift or Kotlin, then you're going to be top pick for a native app development job. So it's kind of that one. And I know Swift, and I do really like it. I like iOS development. We'll have some iOS developers on the pod at some point, but I would say it's enjoyable as well.
Yeah. I have to make an admonishment at this point. I have never written a mobile app.
That's okay.
There was one assignment when I was getting my degree that was a mobile app, and I was doing so well in the course, I skipped it.
Oh, wow.
So I know nothing about mobile development.
Yeah.
So maybe I should prioritize one of those languages for me this year.
Yeah. Yeah. It might be a good one to delve into for 2020. Cool.
So was that everything on the list?
No, we had Clojure. Clojure was on there.
Right. Okay. So this was, again, something that I threw out. And I'm saying Clojure specifically. I think a functional programming language would be good, especially if you're a developer that's working OOP languages for however many years. You're very familiar with it. You understand the concepts. Because functional programming is just a different paradigm, I think it's that learning a different way of tackling a problem or looking at a problem. Mm-hmm. The reason I picked Clojure as the language is Uncle Bob, for those of you that know who he is a big advocate of Clojure, and he likes it a whole lot. And I just respect him so much, like personal, not idol, but icon, or personal hero almost in this space. He recommends it a lot. And because of that, Clojure is the one, when I get around to learning a functional language, will be the one that I learn.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's another one, just if you want to expand your development mindset, it's a good one to learn. And kind of along the same line, the last one we had on the list was C or C++. And we had put that on there for the same reason, where if you're used to a lot of newer languages that handle garbage collection and what else do we have on there? Garbage collection, memory.
Yep, garbage collection, memory management. Pointers, nodes and pointers. So like that type of stuff, if you're not used to having to code it directly, if you learn C or C++, you'll gain a lot of background on the history of why what languages are doing in the background, and just why languages are the way they are today. So I guess, do you have any... Again, this goes back to me going through school, getting my CS degree. When I got to we started in Java. They taught us Java for the first 2 or 3 classes, and then they broke us into a C class for computer architectures. Mm-hmm. And that did a little C and a little C++. You got to choose your language. But all of the things that, like, technically I didn't understand, Like, it's like, okay, I have a fuzzy idea. This was drawing back the curtains. There's no more magic. There's no more hand waving. Like, this is what's going on. And for me, that's when my programming abilities went from, here to, excellent. Well, I don't want to say excellent. that takes time and discipline, but it went from, okay, I can code to I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's why I recommend those languages, but it's also not for those who are just getting into coding and are going to teach themselves. I wouldn't recommend these languages. Start with something else. C# would probably be a good choice. Yeah. And when you get to the point where you want to get under the hood and see what's really going on, then start to explore C or C++. And it opens your eyes a lot. Yeah. And I think that's a valuable perspective.
Yeah, that's probably where I should be going next, I think, because since I don't have a CS degree, I don't have a lot of these base level understanding. Like I've heard of garbage collection. I know Python does it for you. That's all I really know about it, really. And then when it comes to dealing with memory, I've never had to directly access anything from memory.
You don't know what alloc or malloc is?
No.
Yeah, those are the C calls for when you need to allocate certain number or certain amounts of memory, and you have to pass in. This is like if you want to create a list, you're like, oh, this is the struct that I need, and it's got an int and a string, and so you have to have the correct byte sizes in there for your struct, and then you say, I need a list of 64 of those, and you take the size of your struct times 64, and that allocates your memory spaces for 64 of these records. And I probably screwed that up because that's been a long time. I got the math like a little wrong, but that's basically the concept is you don't just say, oh, I want a list and you append to a list. You're like, I want a list this long and here's exactly how big it's going to be.
Right.
I love it. It's so good.
Yeah,
I really like
probably
C.
Be good for me to delve into. So, okay, well, those are the languages we had on our list for recommending. We threw in another section, programming languages not to learn in 2020. Derek, you can start for this section.
This is my Java rant, but we'll preface this. It's not that these are bad languages. It's not that there's no value in them, and it's not that they're gonna hurt you if you do learn them. But kind of looking at the 5 to 10 year timeline, we think these two languages are kind of going away. And for me personally, that's Java. And that takes a little bit of a historical perspective. And you go way back to when Sun Microsystems first released Java. You had people writing code in C and C++. And to simplify the problem, you have AMD processors, Intel processors. Each of those have a 32-bit architecture and a 64-bit architecture. So that's 4 platforms. And that's minor compared to what was actually out there. But you have 4 platforms, and you would have to write code specifically for those 4 platforms. Java was the first language that came out with the JVM. And people today are still aware of the JVM, but maybe not how revolutionary it was, unless you've been taught the historical concept to it. The JVM sits on top of those platforms, and you write Java code, and your Java code is compiled into something called Java bytecode, and then the specific JVM for the platform compiles that down to the actual instructions that the platform understands. So now teams could go from maintaining code for 4 platforms to just one code base, and then the JVM created by Sun Microsystems did the rest. I think it was circa 2006, 2007, Oracle bought Sun Microsystems. And this was before I was coding. I was working as a computer repair guy, but I knew a couple of devs. And people were really upset. They thought that Oracle was going to take the open source community and kind of bend it over the table. And I don't think they've done that. Although, not a bad assumption. But Oracle has now been maintaining Java ever since. And then you've had a bunch of other languages coming out. The biggest competitor, I would say, is probably C#, which is backed by Microsoft. So you have 2 of the behemoths out there, Microsoft and Oracle, backing these super popular languages. But both of them have a JVM concept. Java has the JVM. C# has, I can't remember.
I remember reading about this when I was reading about all the .NET
But
stuff.
yeah, it's got something like that now. So you write code for one, and it doesn't matter the platform, what Microsoft, the .NET framework handles that for you. And if you look at recent activity with Microsoft and Oracle and what's going on, like the release of .NET Core, Azure is quickly becoming the most popular cloud platform, acquisitions of GitHub. Microsoft is making better moves to be developer friendly than Java is. And I haven't written Java in a long time. I've written more C#, but I just get this feeling. And Oracle has a tendency to sit back and watch what's being done and then follow up and execute whatever they want to do. And Microsoft is being a little bit more innovative about that. And so I think you're very quickly going to see C# jump Java.
Yeah.
And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, Java is probably going to be one of those languages that's no longer used. It'll probably be sitting right where PHP is now, where a few loyalists still use it, but for the most part, people just hate using it. And so that's my 10-year prediction of Java. It's recorded. It's out there now.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong, tweet at us, at namespace _pod. Tweet at us and say, Derek, you were wrong. And I will graciously eat, my poor opinion. But in 10 years, when I'm right, tweet at me and be like, hey, thanks for that advice. I'm still working a successful career because I didn't learn Java. You're welcome.
Yeah. Cool.
So that's my Java rant.
Yeah.
Quite a bit longer than the last one. I'll let you talk about PHP, though.
Yeah, we also put PHP on this list. A lot of people know PHP and a lot of people don't like it, which kind of what Derek mentioned before. When people don't like a language, a lot of times like the code base isn't as pretty and people just like don't care as much. And everybody has this mindset that PHP sucks. So even though it's like PHP backs so much of the web, like there's so many applications written in PHP, I would say, I mean, I can't know for sure, but I would say that most new apps that you create today are usually not in PHP. So if you're like going into the PHP world, it seems to kind of be like a dying world. Like there's a lot left over, but to future proof yourself and your skills, I would recommend not learning PHP just because it does kind of seem to be a language of the past that people are eagerly trying to throw away. So
there's never been a language or a technology even that I talk about that people go, ew, other than PHP.
Yeah.
And that's 90% of the people I talk to. Like I said, I met one guy who loved it. He was actually the first senior dev I worked under, and he taught me PHP, and he taught me PHP very well. And I liked doing PHP with him, but there was 20 other devs at this shop, and I hated it because they didn't want to be writing PHP. They had to.
Yeah, maybe we can put a link in the podcast description for that image you showed me. That's like what evaluates to true and false in PHP, because it doesn't make any sense and it makes everyone cry when they see it.
It's type juggling is difficult.
Yeah.
But one last point to this, because we did talk about Python and the governing body and how enhancements are made to Python and just how impressed we were by that process. Mm-hmm. PHP also has something like that, but it's not as active. It doesn't seem as well organized, and you don't have the right people making the final decisions, it seems like. And for that reason as well, I think PHP is eventually just going to collapse to kind of bureaucracy, or certain loyalists wanting it their way and the rest of the community wanting something else. And I just don't see it going places in the next 10 years. I'm pretty sure it's going to fall off the radar as a money making language
for sure. Cool. So we're also going to tack on a section at the end where we talk about our tips for learning programming languages. or frameworks or other tools. Because for me, it's kind of the same method. The way that I like to learn a language or a framework or a tool is starting out with an essentials tutorial, just like very base level. Here's how to use the framework, tool, language. So lynda.com is usually where I go to get tutorials. If you live in Texas like we do, you can get a free Lynda access from the Houston Library online. Just Google it. But
well, I didn't know that.
Yeah. You just
okay.
If you sign up for a library card with the Houston Library with your Texas driver's license, then you can log into Lynda forever, I guess.
Wow, that's useful.
Yeah, and other states probably have it too. Like if you live in a state where the library gives you Lynda access, you should check in how you can use your library card to log into Lynda. Anyway, and then Udemy, of course, also has very cheap tutorials. Everything's marked down all the time. Or YouTube has a great selection of free tutorials. So usually, go ahead.
I love YouTube.
Yeah.
Like, there's wonderful things out there and available. It has a great React tutorial.
Yeah.
Which is where I first learned React. But a plug for myself, I actually am going to be dropping some stuff on like Git and Python on YouTube before too long. So be on the lookout for that.
Yes.
It's a personal project. It's not a namespace podcast project, but But
we will recommend it.
Of course, because I did it.
Yeah. So if you pick out a tutorial, what that helps you with is, of course, you just get a broad overview of the language, but it also will help show you how the language is usually used, like the most common and recommended ways to use the language. So that's really helpful. So you don't just start like throwing yourself into documentation and feeling like you have hundreds of ways to do the same thing, or, just find a tutorial that shows you kind of a baseline the way that things are usually done. And then also you can become more aware of all the options that are available to you without having to read through a whole bunch of documentation, which I actually do recommend eventually just reading the documentation. But when you're trying to learn something from the start, I would say like a video tutorial is a really great way to start. And then my second tip, right as soon as you're done with that tutorial, apply it to a project. You have to pick some sort of project to apply your new skills to. Otherwise, you'll forget them and you won't actually know how to develop with your newfound skill. It's just like something you put on your resume, but you didn't actually like drill it in. So definitely pick a project.
I did that with Ansible, which is not a language, it's a technology, but I learned Ansible and I had this project idea and then it got shut down. I'm like, I don't actually know Ansible.
Yeah, I did a bunch of C# and .NET training, which was really great at the time because I thought I was about to be working on a C# .NET project, but I never got to work on the project, and then I forgot everything, and then I had to take it off my resume.
It happens, yeah.
Yeah.
So my 2 points for learning the language is find somebody that knows the language and wants to teach. That's a fix of what I originally was, which was find the most pedantic person that programs in that language and write pull requests that they're proud to see. Because then you're meeting all these standards that they have. And when you go to them like, oh, I want to do it the right way, the way you're doing it, you goad them into teaching, and they don't realize that they're doing it.
Yeah.
But finding a mentor like that is super helpful. But I think working in open source repositories for that language is helpful as well. Mm-hmm. A lot of the languages that I've learned have been on the job. In fact, my first 3 jobs I got out of college were each one was for a programming language that I didn't know. And so I had to take what I did know, look at the context of the code base, and figure out how to accomplish what I needed to accomplish.
Yeah.
Some of those times I did have a senior dev to talk to. Other times I did not. And so having high quality code that you can draw inspiration from, I think is another great way to learn a language. And that's why I would say, look at the big open source projects, especially for things like Hacktoberfest, and if they have a what's the word I'm looking for? It's V something. I don't know. Like an active community, and that project is used a lot of places. You'll learn a whole lot from checking in some code.
Yeah.
You're going to need the basic syntax and grammar and stuff first, like Jordan was talking about, but that's a great way to, up your skills.
For sure. Okay, great. Yeah, that was everything we had to go through. So thank you guys so much for listening to the episode. Again, you can email us at namespace.pod@gmail.com. We want to hear what your programming languages you're learning and why. Just email us about anything, or tweet, or
tweet at us. I love when you tweet at us.
Yeah. So at namespace_pod. You can follow us on Instagram. Also namespace_pod. Find us on Facebook, YouTube. We're everywhere these days. So
yeah, thanks for listening and have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.